Trisha's...
keyboards for a reason. Like, if you just start playing things, like, it makes it really fun.
Yeah. We'll play stuff. That'll be fun.
Perfect. Okay. So you guys are going to start here?
Sure. Hey everybody, my name's David Andrew and this is Peter James, and we are here to talk to you about all the things that we wish we knew when we started playing piano in church or started playing keyboards in church. We're going to cover a bunch of stuff including tech and requirements and gear and stuff to use. We're also going to talk about the evolving role of the piano throughout history and how it helps us make great choices in the context that you find yourselves in today. And then we're going to talk to you about some practical things you can do when you play your instrument in church. So I'm going to throw it over to Pete.
Cool. So I thought a good place to start would be to talk about gear. Everyone loves gear. Talk about analog versus digital, hardware versus software, all that kind of stuff that we're all into as geeky keyboard players. But the age-old question, analog versus digital, what's best? You can, if you go online, you're seeing this debate happening in real time all the time. And the short answer, analog versus digital, what's the best? Both. It all depends on context. So to give you a little bit of idea, rewinding our church history a bit with keyboard players, first of all, we started off with just keyboards, basically. What was it that we used? Was it Roland RD700 or something like that?
There was the Kurzweils as well.
Yes, that's true.
Can we also shout out the original keys players that we had?
Yeah, Peter King, Craig Gower, Russell Frager,
Jeff Bullock.
Yes.
Who else did we have?
Oh, it's too many.
Too many code for like we forget.
Years back, yeah. We started off with basically keyboards like this.
Yep.
And then we moved into, I think, as things progressed, I think I was one of the first people, the guinea pigs, to try using a laptop with a keyboard. And back then we didn't have solid-state hard drives, we had limited software, computers were slow, and so I was having to try to figure out all the bugs and what worked and what didn't. And so for those albums, we started to introduce Omnisphere a bit, which is a piece of software from Spectrasonics, which we used on a lot of the older albums. If you're listening to Zion album, Oceans, most of the sounds from that song and album are Omnisphere. And then moving along into more of our recent stuff, we're actually starting to use a lot more analog gear in our recent Hillsong albums. But the thing is, we don't use analog gear live, and there's a few reasons for that. In the studio, it works perfectly because you've got time, you can tune it, you can double track it if it's a mono analog keyboard. But live, it's all about stability. And so studio, yep, we pull out all the fancy analog gear, but live, we usually create software versions of our analog synths to replicate what we've done in the studio.
Also, often it's a feature, not a bug, with analog stuff in the studio, right? Like the inconsistencies, we're trying to bring back a little more of that inconsistency to the table rather than it just being a perfect GarageBand demo sound of like...
Totally.
So you want like the inconsistencies and the tuning and the stuff like that.
Yeah, because analog, the thing about analog is every time you play another note or the same note, it'll sound slightly different. That's what makes analog so... It's almost like it's got a soul. It kind of feels alive because it's a little bit... The tuning's different, every performance is different. So with an analog keyboard, you can actually track it once, then track the same part again and again and again, and because it's slightly different, it makes the sound bigger and fatter and wider and huger because of those subtle differences. It's kind of like a choir. If you have one person singing, you get a certain sound, but if you have two people singing exactly the same melody, it gets bigger and fuller. You add 20 people on that, it gets fatter. Same with an orchestra. If you have one violin playing, it'll sound a certain way, but if you start stacking violin upon violin upon violin, because everyone's subtly different, it gets bigger and wider and more lush. And that's kind of what analog can do because it's different every time you play it. But it's not stable live. Like the modern day analog synths are getting better and better, but room temperature will put them out of tune. So if you're playing live and there's a slight change in the room temperature, you've got to recalibrate it. An example of a modern day analog synth, if you can see it, is the OB6 in the back. But even something modern like that still goes out of tune, and it's not always practical live. And the thing you want for live is stability.
Correct.
The main thing you want is stability, whether that comes from a keyboard where it's all the company's made it stable inside there with their software, or you've made a sampled version, which is what I do with all of my analog gear. And it's also, I guess, more versatile if you have a sampled version, because I've got a patch here that's kind of my go-to analog patch, and I've found that sampling my own analog gear and putting it into my keyboard is better. And I couldn't get this patch from analog synths live because Prophet 5 is a mono keyboard, so I had to sample it twice to get in stereo. And then I've stacked about 4 different Prophet sounds, so that's 4 times 2 is 8.
Yeah.
And then I've got an OB6 sound and another, and so to replicate that live, it'll probably take about 10, 12 analog keyboards all MIDI'd up and all in tune and all working perfectly.
All right, I think the people want to hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, cool. So this is my kind of go-to multi that I'm using at church. It's a combination of Prophet 5, OB6 sounds, as well as I've run them all through my Big Sky, and I've had that kind of mixed in. So let's start with...
And Big Sky is a...
It's a Strymon Big Sky as a reverb pedal.
Yeah.
So I have all of these patches mapped to my mod wheel, and the mod wheel is mapped to a low-pass filter, so I can have any sound really mellow or really bright. So this is my basic Prophet sound. It's actually 2 Prophet sounds mixed together. So you can see with the mod wheel moving that up, it brightens the sound. Then I can add the Big Sky versions of those Prophet pads. And then I can add an OB6 patch on top of that. Then another Prophet patch. And then I've got a lead patch. It's an OB6 and a Prophet 5 lead patch. Cool.
That's dope.
So, like I said, Prophet 5, OB6, Big Sky kind of patches all mixed in together. A little shameless plug. Me and David Andrew have all of our sounds, including that one, up on multi-track. So if you want to go check them out, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Talk to us about what this is. What's this piece of equipment?
Okay, so this is a Korg Nano Control 2. Basically, all it is a MIDI controller with knobs and sliders. You can use something like this or anything, basically, that is MIDI compatible. And what I'm doing is I'm just controlling the parameters on my computer. So I've got this to the master volume. These are matched to those individual patches. The low-pass filter is mapped to the mod wheel, but it's just basically an easy way to control my computer. I could use my mouse, but obviously that's less practical, and that's just another way of controlling my computer. Yeah. So that's how that all works.
Plus, it's like an instrument. It feels like it's an extension of what you're doing rather than like
100%.
Putting on your tech hat and like figuring out the code to like...
Yeah. And it's right there. You can just kind of mix it in and build a song by moving the mod wheel up and bringing in and out patches and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and consistency for like sound across when you're traveling and...
Yeah, that's another reason why I like to have everything on my laptop, because if you're touring, if you're traveling, the big thing is wondering what kind of gear you're going to get at every venue. Not every place has... you don't have access to the same gear. Obviously, we don't ship all of our gear over, so having a laptop with pre-built sets, pre-built sounds means you're going to get consistency with no matter what MIDI controller you have plugged into it. So that's another really good reason why I like to use a laptop.
It'd be like a guitarist with their pedal boards.
Exactly, yeah.
So if you rocked up and you're like, oh, this is the pedal board you're using today. You're like,
exactly. You couldn't do it.
What am I doing here?
Hard to
but you've spent ages crafting your tone, crafting the way that you play, even crafting, you know where those parameters are going to be. So you know where your reverb is, you know... Like
100%.
it's your style of playing that you're able to replicate no matter where you are, like as if you had your own pedal board as a guitarist. Is there anything else that we need to know about why we would move away from like a standard keyboard?
Obviously everyone's different, and I'm not going to push everyone to doing what I do.
But budget depending as well.
100%. Some people, if you're just playing a piano, might like a Yamaha or a Nord. If you're a worship leader, that's great because it's consistent, it's stable, you're not going to have any dropouts. I love the laptop because I can experiment more, I can bring in software from a whole lot of different companies, kind of customize my sound a lot. And then, like I said, analog gear is great, but it's not always practical live. If you are going to try using analog gear live, try a new analog keyboard. Like I said, something like the OB6, it stays in tune a lot more than the older stuff. But just experiment, have fun, and find out what works for you.